Welcome once again to our continuing YouTube video series on employment law. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And in this particular video, we will look to discuss a question that's posed by certain people. And that is, can I sue my former employer if I've been laid off? Now, the fact is, the short answer is yes, there might be a potential to sue your former employer if you've been laid off. But the essence of that is whether or not the facts and circumstances allow for it and what the prevailing law in your specific jurisdiction is. So we have a fact-laden, legal basis-driven question that we're posed with that we can't necessarily answer in a video, but we will direct you to what you have to be considering. And one of the first things you got to consider is, what are the circumstances that led to your layoff? Was the layoff an excuse for something else? Or was the layoff done under all the requisites of the prevailing statute and case law and common law and are justifiable? That's one of the major critical points. The next aspect that we're looking at is, are there any other circumstances which resulted in your being laid off as opposed to somebody else, such that this is merely a cover for attempting to effectuate your termination, and your termination being a wrongful termination, such that you almost have to look towards the prevailing facts and see if there is a claim for wrongful termination which can be worked into the layoff arrangement. Similarly, another principle that one would have to look at is whether or not one was being constructively dismissed. And to avoid the pretense of constructive dismissal, instead, the employer sought to lay the individual off and follow the prerequisites in the statute for laying off the individual. And by that same application, we have to look to see if all the requisites for laying off, both under the prevailing statute in whatever jurisdiction you're in, and the case law in your jurisdiction as mandated by the court, is such that there is a basis for laying you off, or if the employer, being your former employer now, failed to fulfill the various obligations associated with laying yourself off. So as we see, you're really looking at a couple key components that you have to pull together and present to legal counsel to make a determination as to whether or not you have a viable argument and it is justified from your standpoint on a financial basis to pursue that matter. So that you have the financial element, factual element. What are the facts and circumstances that are driving this investigation that drove you to be laid off? And how does it all fit in to the specific law, both by statute and by case law, or even common law, that prevails in your particular jurisdiction, to determine whether you would have a case under some of the common bases for initiating a legal action against one's former employer after one's been laid off. And those could be the employer did not follow the statutory requirements and the law as determined by the courts with respect to laying yourself off. There is the aspect of it being a wrongful dismissal. There is also the aspect of it being a constructive dismissal. You might also have in other employment legislation that might pertain to your situation, and Human Rights Act violations that might well pertain to your situation. The key thing is heavily fact-driven, guidance of a knowledgeable lawyer, always important, and that is how you make the determination as to where you go with respect to having a case upon your being laid off. But then again, another aspect of this is collect all your materials. Write down as soon as possible your recollections of your conversations with your former employer. Identify who prospective witnesses might be as to the factual situation that led to your situation. Also ascertain who else was laid off at that time, who might have been laid off just prior to yourself, and who was laid off subsequently, and who was retained. That is information that you'll want to collect and make available to your lawyer so that the proper early determination can be made as to where you stand and what, given the facts, given the case law, are your chances to succeed in such a matter, because it's so heavily fact-driven, so heavily case law-driven, that it's not a simple answer that one can provide on a video, but one can nevertheless provide guidance and direction to get to that point. Hopefully, it has provided you some direction with respect to your situation should you be laid off, and what you should be looking at from the perspective of whether or not you can sue your former employer. Thank you.